My name is Rodney and ASC, CSC. I'm a New Zealander. The last 9 years I've been involved in a series called 24 for Fox with Kiefer Sutherland, and that's been a magnificent experience. And we, I hope, evolved a kind of shooting style which was visceral and involving and carried you along to great peaks of excitement. My father was a photographer, a small town, New Plymouth, and he got his start during the Second World War working as a photo reconnaissance technician in Guadalcanal and up through the islands in the Solomon campaign. And he came back with a really beautiful picture book of imagery from the war, which he smuggled back and printed. And as a young child growing up, this was my first kind of big format look at the other kinds of things that were going on in the world. And because he was already cutting his own movies and an old movie scope and rolling the reels back and forward, and you just fell in love with that whole process of hanging up trims and slipping on the bin. And of course, when I went to art school eventually to a film department, they didn't really have one, but I chose to invent one and made a short film, and remember cutting it with a razor blade and using Scotch tape and punching the holes because they didn't have the proper cut, tape splice and so on. And eventually went through school with a film that was accepted into a film school in Sydney and Melbourne, and it got me into the Royal College of Art in London. And fellow classmates a year ahead of me were Stephen Goldblatt, cinematographer, and also the lovely boys that control everything, the Scots, Tony and Ridley. And I actually worked on commercials after that with them briefly, and then came over here and suddenly got involved in documentaries as a way of paying the bills. So I traveled the world, 5 months in the Amazon, 7 months in the Soviet Union in the old days under the communist regime. Eventually I was offered the opportunity to shoot drama, and just overnight just suddenly realized, oh yeah, drama. I went to film school for that. And somehow I'd avoided it all these years doing documentaries, which I just loved passionately. But I fell into the drama trap, and then I've really basically not shot any documentary work since. The first Canon I got was a 10D, and then a 20D, and then eventually a 5D. It was a way to look at your scene. You could interpolate the ISO, and you could set it, and you could very quickly check the way your light was appearing. What would happen if I shifted this cooler by a few degrees, and then you'd make the necessary adjustments on the film, or you communicate with the timer, or you would send the timer stills. You print them and send them as part of the package, or if you had a setup, you could send it electronically, and when the timer was sitting with the negative at night, he'd get an indication of what your directions were going to be. And then all of a sudden we began to get word that there was this 5D Mark II that also did video. We talked to Canon about it, and they managed to bring two bodies to set one day. And we shot some comparison scenes, basically just one setup with a Canon alongside the Panavision camera and shooting film. And we're just blown away by the results. I found it very satisfying. The noise characteristics were interesting. We went to higher ISOs. And the fact that we could begin to shoot where it was essentially dark was way beyond what I could do with film. And that was very enticing and attractive. 5D in my particular personal favorite, but the 7Ds, the 1D Mark IV, do a brilliant job of capturing motion picture imagery in a quality and with all of the kind of nuances and subtlety that I'm used to on my motion picture camera, which costs $500,000. One of the most powerful things you can do when you're coming to this medium is to put yourself in a dark room with a camera that's going to shoot an image, or take a friend and just put their face there, and then any kind of light, just to introduce it and move it around and push record, and then sit back and watch what the results are, to really explore the possibilities of coming from darkness into light and the qualities of light. Obviously it's helpful if you have a range of instruments to play with, but simply just a power light that you can get from a household warehouse and just hand hold it and move it around the room and maybe play it hard into a shoulder and see the way that bounces off a blouse, and all of those kind of qualities which are moving. They're not things that you can do with a still camera, but when you switch this to video and just let it run, and you sit back quietly and say, oh, I love what happened then, now look what I was doing with the light. And that's something I want to store away, and maybe I can shoot a whole scene like that. And And that's how you begin to understand how tone and light can tell a story. It's a kind of a no-brainer. If you have a feeling that you want to tell stories with motion picture imagery and make movies, these are a perfect way to start, and they will put you ahead of the pack compared to the old 1/3, 2/3 inch chip cameras. They blow them out of the water completely.